Good evening. Welcome to the Bennington Select Board meeting on this Monday, January 13th. Glad to have you here. My name is Donald Campbell. I'm the chair of the Select Board, and I'd ask our individuals to please introduce yourselves. Stuart, why don't we start with you tonight, please?
I'm Stuart Hurd, the town manager.
Jean Connor.
Good evening, Bruce Lee Clark.
Jim Carroll.
Hello, I'm Jeannie Jenkins.
Good evening, Chad Gordon.
Nancy Lywood, secretary.
Great, thank you. I apologize if we left some of you waiting here for a couple of minutes. We were having a tour of the Bennington Fire Facility, which was excellent. Does anybody remember what a set of irons is?
Where or what?
What the set of irons was?
It's a Halligan and an axe.
Very good. The Halligan was a great tool. That looked like a really mean tool, but anyway, we had a good tour down there, and it's really nice to see all that they do and how well they keep everything. So, as is our tradition, I'd like to start the evening with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Chad, could you please lead us in this tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, one and all. First order of business tonight is our consent agenda. This consists of the minutes of January 4th and the warrants as circulated. Presumably everybody has had a chance to talk to the town manager about any issues you might have with the warrants. But if you have any issues that we haven't surfaced with either of these, now would be the time. No? Nothing for Nancy? Jean must be slacking. In the absence of any comments, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
I'll have a second.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda is approved. The next order of business is the public comment. I'd just like to take a second and we haven't had a meeting for a while, but at our last open meeting, a number of people came and talked to us about a shelter, an emergency shelter for homeless, and it was very good input that they brought, very important input about a community need that we care very much about. But I think there was a misunderstanding on the part of the group what public comment is. And public comment is a time for the public to offer what they have on their mind to us. We make an opportunity for people to say what's on their mind. But because the subjects that are coming up are not warned, in other words, because nobody else in town knows they're coming up and there's no opportunity to discuss them, it's really incumbent on the select board not to discuss them at that point, not to make them action items or to bring them up. So what we try to do is we try to leave that public comment as a time to listen and as a time to take on board citizens' thoughts. And if there's something we feel like needs to be done, we talk to the town staff, we talk to the manager, talk to the assistant manager, and we get things rolling from there. So we will have a report for you. We'll have a report for you during the manager's report. Some work on that particular issue has been done, and we can give you an update on that. But again, public comment is really a time for items that are not on the agenda and for things that people have in mind that for some reason, that if they've had a chance to talk to the town staff, that's great. If they have not had a chance to talk to the town staff, it's probably not realistic to expect a real-time answer. So for most questions, the first step would be to call the town staff. Call Stuart, it's easy to get, and say, what's going on with this? Or how do we deal with this? And if you don't get satisfaction through that route, then to bring it to citizens' comment. Does that capture what we discussed? Okay. So, having said that, let's talk about citizens' comment. We've got two people on tonight. The first topic is the Brooklyn Bridge, and Mr. Hoyt. please come on up and give us your thoughts. Why don't you come to the mic in the center, please?
Thank you, actually, if you don't mind,
We've got papers.
I like the podium, trying to get used to it. How do I look? There's a couple issues I'd like to speak with tonight. The first one, both have to do with the last 2 times that I've spoke in front of this select board. The first one has to do with the Brooklyn Bridge, as you noted. I still haven't received a response from the town manager, Stuart. You guys said I'd be getting one. I did see an article in the Bennington Banner. Unfortunately, I think it added more questions rather than answering questions. So I've kind of simplified it here. I got 4 simple questions. Again, my questions are not answered. I'm still expecting one from Stu. Why did we have a job for $180,000 with no contract? Do the new guys have contracts now that we've hired a new company? Why did we accept a bid to start with that was almost double, right? That's odd. And again, my questions originally were around the bid process. I'm very interested to know more about that bid process. And again, what we know about this is the town accepted a job for $180,000 without a contract or without a time limit. Then we refused to pay that contractor, right, and then fired them because they weren't working fast enough. Somehow took it away from that contractor to give it to another contractor. I guess that's all possible if you don't have a contract, but it seems like a shady way to do business for a town. I'm still expecting some answers. The second issue, again, has to do with the behavior of this select board specifically. Again, I'm a town resident. I was born and raised right here in Bennington. I'm a citizen of Vermont. I came forward and told you guys that I've discovered massive election fraud, right? And I have evidence to show that. And Mr. Campbell, I'm going to use your quote here. You were speaking on behalf of yourself and for all members of the select board when you said you have no interest in my conspiracy theories. And you said that without even considering or looking at them. Again, with the evidence I have, I don't think they're conspiracy theories. I'd agree with Representative Carroll's definition of a massive criminal conspiracy is a better definition in my book. And then you went on to be very dishonest with both me and the public, saying that you guys didn't have jurisdiction, which I believe you know is wrong, but I found the code for you. In fact, you guys are the only ones that have jurisdiction. Title 24, Chapter 33, Subchapter 1 of the Vermont statute gives you guys and you guys alone the right to call a meeting for the Board of Civil Authority. So, and again, I'm going to quote right from the statute, meetings for the Board of Civil Authority shall be called to or called by the clerk or by one of the select board members. So any one of you could actually call for this meeting that I'm asking for. And again, that's what I'm asking for. Conspiracy theories aside, we have a discrepancy now of 217 votes. And this, again, has nothing to do with fraud. This is just basic math. Our town clerk
Mr. Wright,
records...
you've had your 3 minutes. I'm going to ask you to wrap up quickly, please.
Okay, well, out of the 217 votes, again, that's just simple math. Those are all Democrats. Kevin Hoyt, Millie Harrington, Deb Harrington, Justin Harrington, Ashley Bump, Larry Gothier, Jesse LaCrosse, Matt DeRosa, Tina Maynard, Juanita Baker. Those are a few of the names that also voted that weren't on either list. They weren't counted at all. Again, all the extra votes are Democrats. All these toss votes are Republican. I've got a massive amount of all sorts of different frauds, and it's amazing to me that our elected officials, aren't interested in election fraud.
Okay.
And I'm asking for an outside investigation. If you guys continue to refuse, we're going to have one.
Sir, your time's up.
We're going to call a town meeting.
I'll ask you to sit down, please.
I'd like to have your participation with outside federal investigators. Thank you.
Okay, the next, well, for the record, I think it's safe to say that this board takes a very different view of things than that, and that's all what we're going to say about it. The next person on the list, Ms. Harrington, we are going to discuss the options tax later in the meeting. Is there something besides that you'd like to bring up?
No, that was specific.
Okay, there will be time for public comment when we get to the local options tax, and you're welcome to participate then if you like. Is that all right? Okay, great, thank you. Moving on, item number 4, financial audit presentation. Mr. Love, I'm sorry to leave you waiting a little bit, but thank you for being here.
Right on time.
We appreciate the work that you've put into this, and look forward to having you walk us through this.
All righty. So again, we've gone to the PowerPoint presentation this year, as we've done a couple of years now. So it's kind of a pretty brief synopsis of a 52-page set of audited financial statements, but hopefully it makes it a little easier to follow. And as we always start out, Dan, if you could, is just to kind of lay out what the responsibilities are. Really, the management's responsibility for the financial statements include preparing and the fair presentation of the financial statements and designing and implementing a system of internal control to ensure that, in fact, financial statements can be prepared accurately. Auditor's responsibility is for us to express an opinion on the financial statements based on our audit. We perform procedures to verify evidence about the amounts and disclosures in the statements. We assess risk of material in the statement, and we consider internal controls that are related to the financial statements. And having said all that, in our opinion, the financial statements for the town of Bennington for the year ended June 30, 2019 are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in America. And our report on internal controls did not disclose any weaknesses in internal control, no material weaknesses in internal control. So the financial statements are made up of 2 components, the government-wide statements, and those are kind of a bigger picture view of both the governmental activities and the proprietary activities. So in these statements, all of the governmental funds, those include the general fund, the community development fund, and the Downtown Improvement Commission, are all rolled into one, but this is also on a full accrual basis of accounting as opposed to the fund financials. So in these statements, we pick up all of the capital assets, and we pick up all of the accounts or property taxes receivable, whereas in the fund statements, they're only recognized to the extent they're collected within 60 days. So on a full accrual basis of accounting, as you can see, the largest assets of the town are the capital assets, which are a little over $18.5 million. As far as internal balances, those are amounts due, in this case, to other funds. The town basically keeps all of its cash, for the most part, in the general fund, so balances due to other funds are reported here. And then accounts and notes receivable of just over $4 million also represent a large piece of the pie, as does cash at just under $5 million. So, and again, on a full accrual basis for the governmental funds, that's what your balance sheet, the top side of your balance sheet, looks like at June 30, 2019. Okay. So as far as liabilities and net position, the net position is clearly the biggest piece of that pie, and again, that's related to the capital assets. So the portion of the fund balance, well, actually net position, which is how we refer to fund, what we think of as fund balance in the funds for the government-wide statements is referred to as net position. That's the largest piece of it. We have net pension liabilities, which are only recognized because, and again, this statement only recognizes long-term liabilities. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're using some jargon that I'm not familiar with. I don't know what net position means.
Okay, net position is the equity. So if you're a commercial business, that would be your retained earnings. So on the government, on the fund financial statements, which is before GASB 34 came in many, many years ago now, but we only reported on a fund basis. So liabilities, long-term liabilities weren't shown in the funds. We had a liability account group, and general fixed assets weren't recorded in the funds. We had an account group for the fixed assets. With that change in the accounting principles, they're all presented on the government-wide statement. So it's different than the general funds fund statement by showing the long-term liabilities and the long-term assets. And net position is just the label for equity on the government-wide statements, whereas fund balance is the label for equity on the fund statements.
Okay.
That help? I know it's tough to do this without jargon.
You know, for the general
No, I understand.
public, you know, we're not familiar with these phrases.
A commercial entity's financial statements are a lot easier to follow than governmental financial statements. So, I mean, you got 52 pages of statements and notes here. So,
And these are summarized in, so this is page 6, you know, this shows
Yeah,
up in the net position down here, so that number corresponds with that number.
Right.
All right. So that was the governmental side, and the other side of the government-wide statements is basically 2 columns, one for the governmental funds and one for the proprietary funds. And for the business-type activities reflected here, that's really the same accounting. They're both accrual accounting, both in the fund statements and in the government-wide statements, and the theory being the proprietary funds, water, sewer, and parking, are intended to pay for themselves by charges to users. So that's what that differentiates the proprietary funds. So these are really the same as you'll see in the fund statements, only this is an aggregate of all 3 of your proprietary funds. So again, capital assets making up the lion's share of it at $25.5 million. That's about a $9 million increase over last year, which is primarily, well, actually kind of split between water fund and the sewer fund. The water fund had a large increase with the PFOA water line expansions, which was funded through capital contributions outside of the town, not government, but so that was just shy of $5 million. And then, as you know, the sewer fund, or wastewater treatment fund, was going through significant expansions, and that's funded with some long-term loans from the federal government. Accounts receivable in total for the proprietary funds was just over $1 million. And again, that $4.5 million that was owed out of the governmental funds is what's showing here as an internal balance as due in from the proprietary funds. Kind of moving quickly here. We've got a Bruins game at 7. We've got to keep moving. Are we okay so far? Mm-hmm. All right. So now on the liability side of the proprietary funds, again, bonds payable at $13.3 million, rough numbers, and that's about a $3 million, just under $4 million increase from the prior year, which is $5.4 million issued, with mostly out of the sewer fund there, net of repayments of debt over the year as well. Accounts payable and accrued liabilities at just under $300,000, and then they've got a little piece of the net pension liability. That's the Beamer's liability that's split between the governmental funds and the proprietary funds. And again, the biggest piece is the equity that's invested in capital assets net of debt at $12.3 million. Good to go? All right, so the statement of activities, and if you're looking in the actual financial statements themselves, the presentation is different than the fund statements. We start with what the expenses are for the different functions of the government. So those are all listed out here, and then we say in the regular statements it shows how those are funded. So if they're funded by charges to services or charges for services or specific grants for a given program, that reduces it to a net cost of service. But in any case, this kind of tells you where on the government-wide side, where's the money going? And as you can see, the highways and roads and police are pretty much actually the general government's in there too. So those are our 3 biggest pieces. Recreation's in there some, and library, fire, public works, and community development as smaller pieces. But again, that's really the lion's share of what our services or cost of our services are related to. Any questions on those?
I'm sorry to take you back just for a minute, but
sure.
What is the unrestricted net position in the liabilities and net positions? The $6 million that's in that?
Okay, so that's just anything that is not restricted by a donor or an outside source to the town. So the net position, if you look at that, again, that's looking at the total equity of in this case, the proprietary funds. Out of that total equity, how much is comprised of the assets and then related debt to those. So if we have 20 million of buildings and it's got 10 million of debts, we say part of that equity is the 10 million net that's related to capital assets, and anything left over that, if it's not restricted outside the town, is the net or the unrestricted net position.
Unrestricted, okay. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Okay, so we kind of got through where it went, and so then we get to the governmental revenues, and those are all pretty well stayed out there. Obviously, the biggest source of revenue for the governmental activities is the property taxes. And a little later when we get to the fund statements, we'll see we've got some trend lines on the different revenue sources. And down the line, the rest of the pieces are all relatively small compared to the property taxes, with the operating grants being the next biggest piece. and that one tends to fluctuate from year to year depending on, what kind of activities we have going on. And when you look at the budget actual on the general fund, we net to about 20,000 to the positive, but that's out of like 14,000 or 14 million of expenditures, so we're not that many. But again, a lot of fluctuations. Oftentimes that comes by whether we get a grant that may not have been anticipated, so we have extra expenditures and extra revenues. But just a little aside on the operating grants. And the others tend to be fairly consistent. The charges for services and investment earnings tend to pretty much stay relatively constant over time. So, and for the proprietary funds, water and sewer, obviously the biggest components of that. Water just over 2.1 million, sewer at just about 1.8, and parking is that little sliver in the top at 17,000 someday. Maybe we'll stop accounting for parking funds separately since it's such a relatively small piece, but that's where the cost of services on proprietary funds come from. So, yeah. And as far as their revenues, charges for services are the biggest piece of that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the proprietary funds, the idea is that they are funded, their costs are funded by the charges to users of the services. Sewer fund at just over 2.1 million, and the water fund at just over 3 million, and parking having $8,400, a very tiny sliver.
Mr. Love, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you back one more time. I can't quite keep up.
Oh, that's all right.
So on the water fund, in the financials, it looks like it's 1.89 million, but on this pie chart, it looks like 2.1 million. Is it, am I missing something in the financials on the water fund side of things?
Okay, so you're in
Page 18.
So I guess that's grouping some other items in with that amount to be a little bit higher on this chart.
Okay, some other.
So you got 2.9 on the water here. Presumably it's picking up the grants as well. Actually, probably it's picking up all of the. If you look at that, it's really the total revenue of the water fund, but the other parts at 50,000 of grants and 48,000 of other income. Presumably the other income is actually charges for services by the fund as well.
I see, so those are being added to the 1.89, okay.
Rather than breaking out the grants piece of it, so. Okay?
Thank you, yep.
Yep. Like I said, these are kind of really summarized from the details in the statements. Yep.
I'm going to be picky.
Okay, so I guess we can skip forward one more. Now we're getting to the actual, switch your thinking back to just fund financial statements now rather than the government-wide. So if we're looking at the general fund, accounts and notes receivable, property taxes receivable, and cash are the assets on the fund basis, not the government-wide. So in this case, the property taxes receivable is a smaller number because it only reflects property taxes to the extent they're collected within 60 days after year end. We've got other current assets of just about 87,000, but you'll notice that there is no capital assets in this particular statement, and that's really the main difference between this and the government-wide statements, and also that this is just the general fund as opposed to including community development and the DIC. So that's where our assets are, primarily in the cash at this point, and again, about $1.3 million for property taxes receivable. For the liabilities on the fund financial statements, the biggest piece, of course, is the due to other funds because, again, we saw the large cash balance in the general fund. It's really a repository for all of the funds. We've got accounts payable of just under $600,000 and accrued liabilities at $241,000 as far as bigger pieces of it. And the deferred inflows of financial resources, that's jargon for basically deferred property taxes. They've changed the name. We don't call them deferred revenue now. We call them deferred inflows of financial resources. Because if there's one thing the Governmental Accounting Standards Board likes to do, it's throw out new pronouncements and make us all learn what that means. So that's the general fund liabilities and fund Sorry, you're ahead of me. Yeah, keep it moving. I like that. So the general fund balance components, and we got the detail of the restricted on the following slide, but the biggest piece of our general fund is restricted amounts. We've got assigned amounts at a very small sliver, committed balance. There's the fund balance designations, again, are basically, they can be listed as non-spendable, assigned, restricted, or committed, or unassigned. And in this case, we have an unassigned deficit of $633,000, which is down from the prior year, and we're kind of whittling away at that. But again, we've got plenty of overall fund balance, so as we've talked about in the past, we don't really see that as any kind of a concern. And as far as what are restricted fund balance pieces, this has been updated for this year. It's a little bit, some of the numbers have changed, but again, the bigger pieces are still remain to be the reappraisal and fire equipment that we've set aside money for. We've got a little over $190,000 for capital facilities, employee benefits and insurance at about the same amount. And down the line, you can see what all they are there. But those are all the detail of what makes up that restricted fund balance we showed earlier. All right. So general fund revenues, and again, this isn't going to look a whole lot different than the government-wide statements because, again, property taxes are obviously the largest source of revenue. And you can see from the slide that beyond that, the other revenues are at $823,000. Intergovernmental revenues, so that's funding that either comes from the state or the federal government. And those are the big pieces of it. And on the next slide, we're showing some of the trends. And you can see, the property taxes are a pretty steady increase, which is, consistent with inflation, probably a little over inflation. Intergovernmental revenues, which is smaller but also tends to stay fairly consistent. Those are big, small. It doesn't look like much of a change, but then again, they're comparing it to the chart that had to fit in 11 million with their property taxes. The other revenues tend to fluctuate a little more, and the fees and charges for investment have stayed a slight increase, and probably about next year we can get rid of that Hurricane Irene line, which shows up on the expense side with nothing for the last 2 years as well. So, okay, that's the revenues. General fund expenditures, again, this year they're actually down from the prior year with $14,216,000 in total. And again, it follows pretty much along the same picture that we saw in the government-wide statements with highways and roads and public safety and general government being the big pieces. The public safety includes both fire and police activities, and obviously the others kind of speak for themselves. And that's where the money went, in the general fund. And as far as the trend on that, again, the general government tends to follow pretty much along with the property taxes. Public safety, that tends to fluctuate a little bit. Sometimes when you see that going up, it's because we've got some additional grants. There tends to be a fair bit of grant funding for some of the police activities. Public works is a small piece and fairly consistent. Recreation, as you can see, fluctuates a little bit depending on what's going on. Debt management was up a bit this year. Again, those numbers aren't huge given in relation to the rest of the charts there, but there is a little jump this year. Highways and roads, I guess I pointed out last year too, the big blip in last year was there was about $2.2 million of debt that was retired that was reported within the highway fund as opposed to being broken out in the debt management section. So that kind of gave the highway a big blip in 1 year there. And then the other expenditures, again, they tend to fluctuate from year to year as well. Boy, that's it for the number slides. The other thing we need to do is we have certain required communications to those charged with governance, and we can send that out as a letter, or we can do it this way, which saves me sending out another letter. So, part of what we have to do is make sure that management selection of accounting principles and policies is appropriate, which we believe they are. We did not see any transactions entered into by the town during the year, which there is not authoritative guidance or consensus. all significant transactions have been recognized in the financial statements in the proper period. And while there are accounting estimates inherent in any financial statements, and for example, depreciation expense in the proprietary funds is considered an estimate. It does follow guidelines, but it is an estimate. And so as, estimates of uncollected receivables or uncollectible receivables goes into there as well. We do evaluate those, and we believe they're reasonable in relation to the financial statements taken as a whole. And we did not encounter any difficulties in performing the audit. We've always pleased to point out that the finance department is very forthcoming and very responsive to any requests that we have. And as far as corrected and uncorrected misstatements, actually we didn't propose primarily the adjustments we've posted this year were provided by the client as opposed to us sending them out. The one thing that we do make adjustments for tend to be some of the government-wide adjustments for the Beamer's pension obligations and our other post-employment benefits. But other than that, Melissa has done a great job of making sure everything's appropriately adjusted before we start the audit. And what else? Disagreements with management. If there can be management, management consulting with other independent accountants is another point. But anyway, we did not have any disagreements with management with respect to how transactions were handled or how anything was reported in the financial statements. And management could choose to check with another accounting firm if there was a question about an accounting policy or procedure and they didn't like what we said they should be thinking about. But to our knowledge, there was no such consultations. And that is the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that great presentation. And in just a minute, if the board has any questions, certainly be ready to put them forward. I think I'd like to thank you on behalf of the town, first of all, for taking this on and for making sure that everything is running as it should. My reading of your financial report is that we're in a good position, strong position. The numbers are trending up. Our cash position is strong. Our practices seem to be strong. The only one part of this whole report that might need a little explanation, and I think it's self-explanatory, but it is the bottom of page 9 where you talk a little bit about the financial analysis of the town's funds, and you talk a little bit about the highway taking advantage of the PFOA, the highway department taking advantage of the PFOA reconstruction. That's the only thing that stood out in this whole report as really being something that might be worth just having you spend a little bit more time on for this group.
That would be a question for Stu, because this is the management's discussion analysis, and in fact, that paragraph was provided by Stu. So, not to throw you under the bus, Stu, but it is yours.
As the PFOA projects were moving forward in the northwestern part of the community, the contracts generally with the contractors called for a repaving of the areas that were disturbed. And RJ took it upon himself to negotiate with the contractors so that we paved the entire road surface. They reimbursed us their proportionate share. So in effect, we took advantage of the projects to get a number of roads paved that otherwise we would not have been able to do.
Right. And so, according to the report anyway, that shows up as a higher cost in one part of the analysis and then shows as a revenue on the other side.
It was not an intended project. So it was essentially RJ committed funds that were in the budget but also had to spend outside the budget, and the reimbursements were to make up the difference. So we overexpended the budget but brought back in the revenue, and although they weren't quite equal, we were able to finish the year with the general activities fund balance in a positive sense.
How much were we reimbursed for that? Ballpark?
Over 300 and some odd thousand, if my mind is correct.
Stuart, maybe while your mic is warmed up, is there anything else that you'd like to point out to us or bring to our attention on this? I think probably all the board members have read it fairly carefully, but nobody quite has the depth with these things that you do after 1 or 2 years of reading them.
Well, I think this year was I think difficult, one of the more difficult years we've had, simply because we decided to take on the PFOA projects and paving issues there. One, it was a benefit to the community. Certainly the people of those neighborhoods got a much better road surface than they would have had we waited. That put us into quite a bind as far as managing the expenditures throughout the rest of the year. So from that perspective, it's really not an accounting issue, but it's recognizing that you've got to be extremely careful going forward with what you're spending so that you do finish in the black. That's the key, and we were able to do so.
Great. Other questions from the board? Okay. No?
And I would point out that I know last year you guys were, ladies and gentlemen, were like comparing to the other towns. I think last year we compared to Brattleboro and Manchester, but we were also told to get them done quicker this year, so we did, but the other towns aren't on the internet available to download, so I couldn't put in comparisons for you, in case you were wondering why those weren't in there, but, so. Got your statements earlier, but I can't compare them to statements that haven't been issued, so.
Okay.
And maybe they're issued but not posted online yet, but.
All right. Stuart, do you need a motion to accept this from us?
I don't believe we need a motion to accept the offer.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the time it's taken you and the good work you've done.
Thank you. We appreciate being able to work with you.
Thank you.
This worked. I spent like an hour making sure my little portable projector would work really nicely today, and then Dan, so we'll use this. Thank you.
He's the only one that can make it run. All right, so the next order of business, this topic is titled Local Options Tax Discussion. I guess I'd like to, if the board would allow me, just before before you start, I'd like to preface this conversation by saying what we're talking about tonight is, it's about the local options tax, but really what we're talking about tonight, because of the way things go, is do we put this on the ballot for the voters to decide? So that's what we're really looking at tonight, is this something that is interesting enough that the voters should decide what happens with this? So if we conclude after this meeting and our next meeting that this is something worthy of putting on the ballot, then we would have a series of discussions during the course of the winter, which would give the entire community an opportunity to talk about the merits or demerits of having an options tax. But tonight, we don't need to spend a lot of time having a debate about this, because at this point we're just looking for, is there an opportunity suitable for putting in front of the voters? So should we let the voters have a crack at this, yes or no? So that's the way I view this part of the discussion. We'll have it again at our next meeting. And again, if we decide to go forward with this, we'll talk about it during the course of the winter. Personally, I think it's a great idea, but that's irrelevant at this point. And so let's see what you have to show us, Shannon, about this, and then we'll have a little more discussion about it.
Great.
Thank you.
And also, I am not an expert on local option tax. I'm here as your worker bee, just with kind of a cursory study of what is the local option tax, and you tasked me with putting together a one-page sheet for the public. So for folks here in the audience, there's a one-pager on what is a local option tax, and there are some fact sheets from the Vermont Department of Taxes. There are many more on their website, but these are all on the table right over here. So if you want to pick some up on your way right now or on your way home, you want to make that bigger, Dan? I'm trying. Okay, well, for now that's fine. So just some basics about what a local option tax is a tax mechanism that allows municipalities to generate more revenue by adding an extra 1% to the state sales tax, which is currently 6%. The additional revenue raised by the local option tax is divided so that 70% of that, 1% extra, goes to the municipality, in this case Bennington, and the other 30% goes to the state. That 30% that goes back to the state is used to reimburse municipalities for state-owned buildings in their towns, so some of that would come back to Bennington. And it's also used to cover the administrative costs for operating this program by the Vermont Department of Taxes. So 20 Vermont municipalities, including the towns of similar size that are closest to us, Manchester, Wilmington, and Brattleboro, as well as Rutland, have a local option tax either on sales and/or meals and rooms and alcoholic beverages. And you can do it in different ways. You can decide to do all 3 of those option taxes, or you can choose 1 or 2, etc. So some numbers from the tax data from the Vermont Department of Taxes for fiscal year 2019 for Bennington. Retail sales, you'll see, are 138 million plus, so 1% of that. And then you have the meals collected, rooms taxes, alcohol taxes. So the total of all of those taxes collected, adding up all of the 1% that you would add onto it, that total comes to $1,819,304. So, does everyone understand that so far? So the town would receive 70% of that 1% tax, which would total a little over 1.2 million. So the question that we have now is, what would we do with that and why? So different towns have approached this differently, and part of, I think, our discovery process going forward would be reaching out to those towns and finding out more about what they've done. But one common method is to reduce the overall tax rate, also for large capital expenses. So one idea that we've talked about is that over 50% of that revenue would go to property tax reduction, and then we would create annual reserves for capital purchases and infrastructure improvements. So that includes, capital purchase for buildings, machinery, et cetera. Parks and recreation. We have a lot of expenses coming up in the sense of, replacing some of our playgrounds. We have rec center improvements that are being made. Also marketing and economic development. So this is one option.
And these are possible choices.
These are all possibilities. I mean, it's really up to the board to decide how to use that revenue. And that's what the discussion should be for the next, couple of months before deciding whether or not to put this on the ballot. So
Just to clarify, just to correct what you've just said.
Yeah.
I think we'll be deciding whether or not to put it on the ballot in the next couple of meetings.
Right.
Then during the course of the winter, we'd be having open conversations with the community about whether or not this makes sense for a majority of the community, so that people would know how they feel and know how to vote when town meeting day comes. Yeah.
And one thing that we can do is put this information up on the town website, the town Facebook page, collect people's comments and questions, and then, do some research to get the answers to any questions that we don't know. But given those options that we just talked about, funds from the local option tax would lower the overall tax rate for property owners, and Stu can speak more to that. Minimize borrowing for large equipment purchases, fund the Vermont Begins Here town marketing campaign, help fund a phase 2 addition to the rec center, and pay for upgrades to our pathways and park systems. So a couple of questions that have come up immediately are, what about online retailers? I did talk to the Vermont Department of Taxes, and actually just this year, there was legislation passed, so all online retailers are subject to sales tax and local option tax. So exemptions from sales tax include groceries, food and beverages, except for soft drinks. Those are subject to sales tax. So prescription and over-the-counter medications are exempt, medical equipment and supplies, fuel for home heating, clothing with some exceptions. Motor vehicles are not subject to the sales tax, local option tax, although they are subject to purchase and use tax by the Agency of Transportation. Farm equipment and energy for manufacturing. So these are kind of the big exemptions that stuck out, but there's a whole list that's attached to this one pager that really gets into what all the exemptions are. And that's what I have so far.
Okay, so why don't we do this, Shannon, before you sit down, why don't we, or maybe we should ask questions of Stuart. How would you like us to do this? Would you like the board to ask questions of you, of Shannon, of the two of you? What would you like to, how would you like to
You can
take?
direct them to me, that'd be fine.
Okay,
I mean, I think if I could follow up,
yeah, a summary.
excuse me, on what Shannon said. I mean, we talk about, instantly being able to reduce the property tax. And there are some communities that take the entire amount and put it towards property taxes. But then they're still carrying in their normal budgets, capital purchases, large truck purchases, those kinds of purchases that, in fact, can be pulled from the budget. And I took a look at the proposed budget for this particular year that we're coming up to vote on. And over time, if you were able to pull all of the debt and the major capital purchases out of the general fund, highway fund, and fire fund budgets only, it doesn't include water and sewer at this point, there's $927,000 in the budget for those expenses. Imagine, that would be a little over 9 cents on the tax rate.
That would
So,
lower the tax.
over time, if you can pull all of that out, and you can't do it instantly, but over time, if you could do that, property taxes would go down by 9 cents on the rate, or on a home of a $100,000 value, you'd save $900 right off the top. So it can be, in a sense, a double benefit. Not only do you have a pot of money that you can allocate towards reducing the tax rate, but you also are pulling expenses out of the budget, which further reduces that tax rate. So for property owners, it can be certainly a win-win situation. And now I'll answer any questions you might have.
So my first question to you might be about other communities. And I don't know if you have a lot of contact with other managers or mayors or people around the state, but it sounds to me like most other large communities, most other communities of our size, or many anyway, have chosen to go this direction. And not all, but most of the ones that are our size. And I wonder if you have any sense of what they do with it, or how they treat it, or what it's done for their communities, or some of this might be more appropriate for a winter conversation
Yeah,
but
we haven't had the time to really go out and gather that information. I talked with Peter Elwell, who is the manager in Brattleboro, and they have just implemented the local option sales tax. They've had the other rooms and meals and alcohol taxes in place already, but they just implemented this year, and they are committing, I believe he said, they are committing that entire amount to reducing the property taxes.
Okay, great.
Now, what they're doing with the other funds, I don't really know. But in their first quarter, because these funds come to the municipality in quarters, they received their first check of $200,000 from the state of Vermont, from July to September.
Great, okay. And just sticking with the process here a little bit, whether or not we put this to the voters, I reread the revised charter. Thank you for getting me a good, clean copy of that. And it does look like that charter update, which we recently did and was widely approved, leaves open the possibility for selecting any one of those four or any combination of those four.
That-
So in a draft ballot that you circulated earlier, it looked as though you had to vote on all four at once. Would your proposal be, or would you suggest that the board, in order to get the best sense of the community, would be to break them out and vote one by one on them?
Well, you certainly have that option. I put it forth as all for it in one yes or no vote. But should you decide that, well, we want to take a look at each individual and see what the community supports, you can put them on individually or in a combination. Most people combine rooms and meals. That's how we say it. But there actually is a rooms tax and a meals tax. They are, I believe they are different. But the state tax department, depending on how you select them and whether or not we are successful, the state department needs 90 days notice. It changes the tax rolls for Bennington in whatever category we have been successful. And simply get that word out so that at the beginning of July, that first quarter of the fiscal year, people would begin collecting that 1% tax.
Okay, great, thanks. Before I open it up to other board questions, I'd like to just say, I'm going to enter into the record, but I don't have a copy of it, Nancy, so I'm going to have to email this to you. A copy from Bruce Faller and Wendy Kleinfaller, who, I'm not going to read the whole letter, but they did ask that this letter be entered into the minutes. It's a letter talking about online shopping and bottom lines and bricks and mortar stores. It's a good letter, thoughtful, but it's not really the topic for tonight. Tonight is just whether or not we should allow voters to have a shot at this. And so I reached out to Bruce and Wendy and said I would enter this letter into the record, but that I would also, if we decide to put it on the ballot, I would welcome them coming back and reading it in open session and being part of that conversation. So I'll get a copy of this to you and to Stuart shortly. So questions for either Shannon or Stuart from the board? Jean?
I just, you mentioned one of the communities made a change, or they're going to be changing what is being taxed. Did that have to go, do any changes that, let's just say it passes in some iteration, and then another select board or the community decides they want to do something different, does every change have to go back to the voters?
No, the only time, at least in my opinion, the only time you would need to go back to the voters is if you set up by ballot how those taxes were going to be used. So the voters are actually going into the booth and they're voting on the retail sales, it's going to go all to property tax relief. On room sales, it's going to go to capital infrastructure. If you did it that way and they voted yes all the way down through, then if you wanted to change how you use that money in the future, you would have to go back to the voters for permission to do so. But you can, I mean, in most towns, the select board lays out how they plan to use it. If you recall, I think it was a year or so ago, perhaps two now, Wilmington had a great deal of conversation with the community about how they were going to use the local option taxes that they were now allowed to raise. And it was a give and take between the community and the board as to how that was done. It wasn't part of a ballot question.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I just understood because you answered in a way that I didn't understand. Because I thought Jeannie was asking, let's say Brattleboro all of a sudden decided they're going to add sales, a 1% sales tax.
No.
That would have to go by ballot.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just wanting us all to be clear. Anytime we were to decide either to add a 1% option tax on any of the four or take one away, we would need to vote, the select board, whoever's in it, would need to vote to put it on the ballot, and then there would have to be a ballot, and the voters decide. I think that's correct.
That is correct.
Okay. I'm glad I'm not crazy, at least not about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, right. So, Bruce, other questions, or have you got other things you're wondering about while you're on a roll?
I don't have things I wonder about. Are we going to come to places where we can say what brought us to the decision we're going to make?
Well,
I'd like us to be able to do that.
Do this over the course of 2 meetings.
Right.
And that at the end of next meeting, we decide whether or not to put it on the ballot.
Okay, so
And then
that would be fine.
after, if we've decided, Stuart, there's time for that, right?
Well, the January 27th meeting, you will be asked to sign the warning, because the warning must be published by the 1st of February.
So we can vote that night.
So
I thought we were going to vote on it tonight. I didn't know.
What we can do is we can come to the meeting, the next meeting, January 27th, with that page in a variety of ways, so that whatever you decide, that's the page that gets signed into the warrant.
Well, it feels like a big discussion and one that we should give the community plenty of time on. So I'd love to use our
Sure.
I'd love to use the next
I'm
2
clearer
meetings.
now about our process.
Yeah, so does that make sense to you? Whether or not to put it to the voters first, and then...
That I thought, the question was when were we going to vote to put it on the ballot, and I thought that was, after Saturday's meeting, I thought that was today, but I guess it's next time.
Okay. Other comments from board members? Chad?
Stuart, just because you said, if we were to remove those items, we could get this passed and remove those items from the budget. You said someone who owns a $100,000 property or in Bennington, they would be reduced about $900 in their property tax.
That's correct.
So a property owner could potentially pay less taxes that year under the system overall. But we're just shifting the tax is what we're saying, like it's being, pay less theoretically.
Yes. Depending on the value of your home, you're going to pay less the year after this is implemented than you would be paying in the year before.
Now, there's some income sensitivity to that, right? So that makes it complicated.
Well, yeah, I don't deal with the income sensitivity issue.
Right.
But in either case, the amount that would be owed, whether subject to income sensitivity or not, would be less.
Okay. And you're using $900 as an example for the full amount, right?
Yes.
On a $100,000 home, okay. And it would, if we do decide to move forward with this, I think we owe it to the taxpayers to really make clear what the choices would be. So we hear a lot of complaints about tax rates. I don't know, anybody else hear anyone complain about their property taxes?
Never.
So if we're looking at a possible partial solution to increasing property tax rates, we need to be very clear, I think, about what it actually means. So but we could do that over the course of the winter if we decide to move forward with this. So. Other questions on this part of the process? Go ahead, Jim.
Shannon, is this on the town website?
It will be.
Good, because this really, there have been people who've thrown out some rather ridiculous remarks that, everything's going to be taxed, and this highlights the exemptions that range anywhere from garters and garter belts to wedding apparel. And it's important that, people be well informed about what is exempt. And this is from the Vermont Department of Taxes. And it's pretty thorough. Over-the-counter drugs that are exempt are aspirin, acne medication, decongestants, antihistamines.
You're in the exempt category now, right?
Yes.
From sales tax.
And there are medical equipment and supplies, wheelchairs, stair lifts, canes, crutches, motorized carts. Those are all walkers. Those are all exempt, as well as many prosthetic devices. So that, it's not going to be this tax on everything. And really, just to offer my 2 cents on it, this is a really unique and important opportunity for the town of Bennington to, in essence, lower the taxes on the property owners in this town. Bennington has always thrown open its doors and welcomed our neighbors and paid for police, highway crews, the highways, water and sewer, and the infrastructure, parks. Yeah.
But again, that's an argument for later. I thought the discussion is...
Please let me finish.
I will, but I'm just saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and it's an argument that I would disagree with. And
I just haven't had much luck reining in Jim over
I
here.
understand that.
Anyway, you know, the people in Bennington, the property taxpayers, have been very generous with our neighbors. And we're just asking for a little help to make sure that we do have good passable roads, the infrastructure that they all enjoy. End of sermon.
Jim, any questions on process? Any questions on what it would take to put this in front of the voters? Or anyone else have any questions?
I have no questions.
No? Okay. So how many people, I see a lot of eager faces out there, how many people tonight would like to speak on this? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay. This is good. We don't have too many people. I guess we would like to stay on track, so if I could, I'd ask you to please keep your comments to 3 minutes. But let's go ahead and bring people up. Mr. Hoyt, you want to start?
Thanks again. It's pretty clear to me that you guys have already made up your minds as we talk about having winter discussions before we put it on the table, and we've already assumed that this thing is going to pass. I don't know what world you guys are living in. You're coming from a different meeting than I am, right? You look at these pie charts, the big circle is always us. The burden's on the taxpayers. If you want to give us a property tax decrease, then give us a decrease. It's not a decrease if we're paying for it. Right? You're looking at a 7% property tax, 8% school tax increase. It's in a single year. On top of your water tax and sewer tax and fire tax and tax, we cannot afford this. I thought we were supposed to buy local. This is going to push local business away from Bennington. We're being punished for buying local. It doesn't include everything, Jim. It's just all of our cigarettes, all tobacco products, all, alcohol, anything at Walmart. This is a big tax. It's going to devastate the town of Bennington. It's going to push more businesses out of Bennington. It's going to prevent any other businesses from coming. This is the opposite of the direction we should go in.
So, Mr. Hoyt, before you leave,
Sure.
all I really want to get at tonight is this something the voters should decide on, yes or no?
I don't think so, but it looks like you guys have already made up your mind, and I think you've already spent the money. I don't want to give you another $1 million for, it's $21,000 per person to govern the state of Vermont right now, per person. We cannot afford it. We're already looking at, $16 billion in debt is the low number, and you guys just keep on tacking more. We can't afford it. We're losing our businesses. We're losing our houses. You can't get any more money out of us because we have no more jobs. So now you're going to put it to us on our standards, right? And then you're going to make up more laws, and when we can't afford to pay it, well, Jesus, you'll take our house or you'll close our business. This is backwards. This is the opposite direction. This isn't community growth and development. This is the destruction of Vermont. I oppose this tax.
Okay, that's fine. And
I don't think we should vote on it.
to oppose it tonight. I think the question is, should we allow taxpayers to vote on whether or not a potential route to reducing property taxes should be considered? Should they get a chance to consider it?
No, I think you guys should consider your overspending. I don't want another tax to pay for your misappropriations. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Harrington, are you still wanting to speak?
Well, I think he summed it up fairly well. I just don't think the businesses in Vermont can afford any more taxes. I mean, you can barely afford to go out to eat as it is, and another 1% on top of that, 15% in between school taxes and property taxes. And you say it'll reduce property taxes, but is there any guarantee in writing that it's going to do that? How much of the money is actually going to go toward reducing people's taxes? And is it going to equal out to $900 per $100,000? And what are the exemptions? You said there's some income limit exemptions. I think all those things should be known ahead of time, and I think that it's being rushed through. It seems that January 27th is awfully soon to be rushing this through, to go on to what ballot? For March of 2020? Is that the ballot?
So we have the winter to discuss it.
I think I would urge anyone not to approve it. There's enough taxes as it is.
There'll be time for that. So let me ask you a question. I'd be interested to know, these, many other communities have already adopted it and live with it, including Brattleboro, which is right on the edge of New Hampshire, and other communities like that. Have you spoken to anybody in other communities about this, or?
I haven't. I can't say as I have. I just know what we pay currently, and I think another tax is just outrageous to even consider. And, possibly infrastructure and other things would benefit, but, when we're paying $500,000 for a salt shed, maybe we should look at reducing our costs for what we're spending in those areas before we look at adding on additional taxes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we do pay pretty close attention to that. But I guess one of the things that would be interesting to just be clear about is that the town, like any other businesses, we're stuck with expenses and revenues. And that's the balance of those two things is how we end up setting tax rates. Now, if we try to keep our expenses low every year, and Stuart, you've done a great job over the years, and I think this town can be very proud about bringing in some of the lowest tax increases in the state over the years. But the problem is, if you don't have enough revenue, you can't keep up with your parks, and you can't keep up with your roads, and you can't keep up with your deferred maintenance. And the only way to get that revenue right now is to tax, if you need additional revenues, to tax the property tax owners more. And as a property taxpayer, I can say I'm not in favor of that. So this options tax is an effort to look at another way of finding revenue to bring down overall costs. At some level, regardless of how you break this up, it could be said that all of this money goes to reducing property taxes because it offsets other revenue that has to be generated from property taxpayers. So I'm trying to stay agnostic about this for the most part right now, but I do feel like it's really important that we realize that this is about trying to find other options besides continuing to ask local property taxpayers to pay for everything. So,
I also think possibly it could be clarified again that the select board doesn't decide to do this or not. The select board gets to decide if the voters get to decide. The responsibility to do it or not to do it doesn't lie here, it lies out there.
okay. No, Mr. Hoyt, no, I'm sorry, you're out of order. Please sit down. I'll call on you after I talk to... Please sit down. Please sit down. Betsy, come on up. Please introduce yourself.
So I am Betsy Rathbun-Gunn, and I'm a resident of Sandgate, but I'm a citizen of Bennington County. So, I will be asked to pay these taxes without any direct benefit to my, property tax whatsoever, because I don't live in the town of Bennington. But I eat in the town of Bennington, I get gas in the town of Bennington, I buy things in the town of Bennington, and I certainly am a real proponent of all the different assets that Bennington has to offer. And I really fully support this because I do think it's a way for Bennington to recoup some of the money that it spends to allow Bennington County, New York State, Massachusetts folks be able to benefit from all the infrastructure that Bennington puts into it. So I'm pleased to know it will benefit the tax structure of Bennington, and hopefully some of the money will be reserved for some of those assets that we really hold dear to us. I know up in Manchester, the parks program up there is a huge asset and a huge draw. And it is funded a lot through the option tax. So I really think that this is something that actually helps support the residents of Bennington by asking everybody to contribute that participates in Bennington throughout all these pieces. So
thank you for
it's
that.
A little bit of a different perspective on it.
As an outsider, if you, as a Sandgate person, you may not be able to answer this, but you're a woman that's lived a big life and had broad experiences. Does it seem fair to you that we put this to the voters as opposed to?
I think that if you look at the exemption, obviously food is exempt, necessities are exempt, all those will still stay tax exempt. We're not adding a percentage onto that. You know, for 11 years, I ran a hotel, an inn in town. I did lots of events, lots of weddings. People come into Vermont to spend a lot of money, and we're very fortunate for that through our tourism. They will also be contributing to this. So it is a broad-based tax, and I know it was controversial when it was first put into Manchester. Now it's just kind of part of the process, but when you look at their park system that they've had, I don't know, I think they have had $16 million come into their community through this tax, and it has really, really broadened the benefits for those that live there without having to ask the residents to pay more local tax, because we all use those resources. So as county residents and those that do surrounding residents too. So I think that, you know, again, it makes a lot of sense because we're looking at what is exempt. We're not going to tax those necessary things that are already currently exempt that make life possible for all of us. Very
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sir, yeah, please come on up. Yeah, either one, wherever you're more comfortable.
Pardon?
Wherever you're more comfortable.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Okay.
To answer the question, no, I don't think.
Would you introduce yourself, please, for the secretary?
Brant Young, B-R-A-N-T-Y-O-U-N-G. No, I don't think, I think the vote should be put up to the town on whether we should have this. This is a wannabe tax. Nothing's guaranteed. And the more we get older, the more we die, the more the factories close, the more the people move out, the less tax we're going to have because the less spending's going to be done. I think we need to tighten our belts and look other revenues besides this, like not borrowing big sums and having to pay it back over a period of years. There's got to be other ways and just keep throwing us into taxation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Going to bring John up and then, yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, thanks. Just to keep things on track, and thank you, Jeannie, for saying that. Tonight, all we are asking the board to do is vote on whether to make this issue an option for the entire community. So as you consider whether to put this on the ballot, it's not really about our opinions, a handful of us. It is an enormous opportunity for our community to accomplish many, many things, and some issues that Betsy brought up that everybody needs to think about. So all we are asking is that all you do tonight is give the entire community the opportunity to vote on this. And then we do have a few weeks or months to discuss how to use it, the positives or the negatives, but it's too big of an opportunity to base your decision on just a handful of opinions, because the vast majority of people in Bennington aren't anti-everything. They are for a lot of the positive things that are happening in Bennington, and this opportunity is too important to leave it up to just a handful of people. So we're urging you to just give everybody in this community the opportunity to vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. And they do get to the previous comment about belt tightening. You know, we do work very hard on budgets, but we also, I see your hand, Kevin, but I'm going to call on people who haven't spoken already first. We work very hard to both tighten the budget, but we also, maybe not in this room, but we hear from a lot of people, we want more of this, and we want more, whatever it is, recreation, we want better streets, or we want more roads, or we want more police coverage, or we want polices in the schools, or whatever it is. And so we have a lot of people asking for more things, but not a revenue stream to pay for them right now, except for the property taxpayers. So I think that's maybe what you're getting at, John, is that is that up until now, we've only been able to do all of this stuff on the back of the property taxpayer. And this is potentially an opportunity to spread it out, not just to taxpayers, but to other people who come from outside of the community and use services within our community. Okay. Yes, come on up.
Thanks. Dana Rozicki. I think if you were to put this on the ballot, I think it's important to break it out into the different categories as much as possible. So I think it'd be very hard pressed to find anyone in town who object to a rooms tax. That could be considered a progressive tax in that the people who are more able to pay will pay the rooms tax. Other elements could be considered a regressive tax in the sense that retail taxes as a percentage of income target lower income people more than they do higher income people. And I think if you want to get an element of this through, bringing it out on a broken out basis to the extent you can is absolutely the way to go.
Okay. So you would advocate, just as long as you're at the mic, you would advocate for breaking it out in those 4 buckets that
Yes.
Stuart talked about. So
you get the most responsive.
Sales tax, rooms tax, meals tax, alcohol tax.
Yeah,
and
you'll
let
get the
people
best
decide.
information possible from the voters if you allow them to break it out and not present it as a market basket, but each individual tier.
I agree with you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, Beth, come on up.
So Beth Wallace, and I have to admit that I too am a resident from another community. I'm from Shaftesbury District 1.
Wait a minute. Aren't you from Bennington, though?
I'm born and raised. But to piggyback on what Dana was saying, the other option, and to kind of piggyback on what you, ma'am, were saying about the guarantee of how this revenue would be spent, you could also guarantee that a certain percentage of whichever tax was approved was reserved to bring down property taxes, right? That's the piece that if a future select board wanted to change would have to go back to the voters, correct?
That's right.
So you have some options there to give those guarantees. And again, as a Shaftesbury resident, I would happily pay a 1% tax on my meals and my alcohol and my sales. Thanks.
Great, we'll take your money. Sorry, don't mean to be quite such a chiseler.
Start now.
Stuart, do you want to talk to us about, answer that question just a little bit about reserve funds or?
Well, I think there's 2 issues. If the voters establish a reserve, which we ask them to do when we put our budget on the ballot, there's a paragraph that sets aside those monies that are in the budget to be reserved for specific uses. Those become designated reserves. If it's the select board sitting at a meeting saying, well, we're going to put 80% of this money to taxes, that's not necessarily a long-term commitment that requires voter change. Mm-hmm. It requires a future board may change it, and depending on how the revenue streams are going, a board may want to do something else or redirect the funds to a major capital project. So you're not bonding for a $3 million project because you have sufficient funds behind you to do a project of that size. So if the voters set the reserve, then the voters must be asked to undo the reserve or change the reserve.
Okay.
If the board sets the reserve, then a future board is only necessary. You don't need to go back to the voters.
In extended conversation that I had with John O'Keefe, the town manager in Manchester, the way that their select board handles it is it leaves it undefined so that in the event of some unforeseen catastrophe or expense, it allows the select board a greater deal of flexibility to devote that option tax revenue to different things. However, he did say that by and large, I think he said it was close to 80% of the option tax goes towards lowering property taxes up there.
Okay. Other people that have not spoken yet, yes, come on up. Please, Nancy, please come on up and introduce yourself and tell us what you think.
Hi, Nancy White. Can you explain for me, what will this look like on a ballot if you decide to put it on a ballot? Will it be yes or no? Will that be what we'll be voting on?
Yes.
So people won't be checking which ones they would want.
Well,
We're deciding that.
Yeah, we're deciding that.
That's what we've been talking about.
Now, theoretically, you have 4 categories, Nancy. You could put a yes or no question with each of those categories, which is what Dana asked us to consider and what Bruce is in favor of doing. Or you could lump them all into one. The charter question, they were all lumped.
I don't want to see another ballot like the charter ballot.
Well, that's fine. We hopefully won't be rewriting the charter extensively in the near future. But
The problem I have with this, it's if you don't get us with our tax bills, you get us when we're shopping locally. We're a poor town. We don't have the money for all these extra things. The option we need to be looking at is cutting back on our town budget. When I look at some of the options you have on here, citizens won't have any say in how you use this money. Correct? Marketing, parks and recreation, we won't have any say in who will decide how that money gets spent?
But we are your representative government, and we are elected to try to spend the taxpayers' money to the best of our ability.
All right, so it will be the board deciding.
It would be unless, as Stuart has already said a couple times, unless we set up reserve funds, in which case they would be reserved for specific uses. And we're not there yet. Right now, all we're trying to decide is should we put this on the ballot to allow the voters to decide, not the select board, to allow the voters to decide whether or not they would like to consider this tax. So that's what we're asking you tonight. Should the voters decide?
Of course, the voters should decide.
Okay.
And I have yet to speak to anybody in Bennington who is in favor of the local options tax. Everybody says it's too expensive to live in this town, in this state. We're a very poor town. We can't afford these extra things. Jobs are leaving, businesses are closing. Why would you ask a business to have to charge somebody more money?
So there will be plenty of opportunity to debate it this winter if we decide to put it on the ballot. But right now, we're not debating it.
But this is
Do you
the thing
understand? Right now, we're not debating the
I
option
understand
tax.
this.
Okay.
The night before we voted on the charter, you held an informational meeting. At that meeting, you said if this was going to be on a ballot, there would be plenty of time to talk about it. I think 6 weeks before we have an election to decide this is far too late to be starting the discussions. We should have had these discussions and had a decision months ago so people had time to think about it. Again, I think it's something else you leave until the last minute, hoping that people are going to get confused and not get out to vote.
Okay.
And I think this is something that people who haven't voted in years are going to get out to vote on.
Okay.
We're being taxed to death in this town. We can't afford it.
I agree. There's too much property tax, and I'd like to do something about it, so.
There's too much tax everywhere. Every time we turn around, there's a new pet project or program. I look at marketing, $100,000. That's what the Chamber of Commerce is supposed to do. Why should we pay another group to do what the Chamber is doing?
Well, that's a longer conversation, and again, if we decide to put it on the ballot,
Well,
we can
here's a
have
quick
that this
question.
winter.
So does the Chamber pay property taxes on their building?
yes,
Yes,
They do.
yes,
yes,
Do they get money from the town or no?
no.
no.
Okay. Then why would we have a second group in addition to the Chamber?
Well, you know, the chamber is not within our control. The chamber is its own entity. Is anybody on the board
It's a
member of
private
the chamber?
business.
Okay, so they get
Yeah.
nothing at all from the
So-
town. I thought they
so-
had their building tax-free.
No, so,
Okay, no, that's all right then.
Can I answer that, Donald?
Yeah, go ahead.
Historically, they were tax exempt.
Yep.
The voters had approved a tax exemption for the chamber years ago. Within the last 2 years, we did not put it back on the ballot because the law is very specific about what agencies can be placed on the ballot, and the chamber does not qualify.
So they are paying taxes.
Yes, they are.
But I think this is an example where you have two groups doing the same thing in one town. It's one way you could save money.
okay. Other people who have not had a chance to comment yet? Come on up, Rose.
I'm not going to. I just want to know what did you mean?
Rose, it's really, nobody at home can hear you if,
Yeah.
I just wondered what you meant when you said you were always willing to help our neighbors. What is that? I just didn't understand what you meant by
I
that.
was always willing to help our neighbors.
That was a comment that Jim made.
Jim made?
No, we've opened our arms and our roads to to our neighbors, our good neighbors, and made it an attractive place to come and shop and come to use our parks and our recreation center. And what I suggested is that to our good neighbors, we'd like just a penny on the dollar to help ensure that we can continue to do those things, rather than having it rest entirely on the property taxpayers, which has been happening for decades. That's what I meant.
I can tell you right now, I was looking for something that I wanted here. It was not here. I went to Saratoga Mall and I found it. So that's $300 I spent there instead of spending it here. So what are you gaining?
You probably paid more in taxes over there, too.
Yeah, you do.
I got what I wanted.
I understand.
So we are over time on this, but I have promised you I'd give you an opportunity. Mr. Hoyt, if you want to come up again, I'd ask you to be very brief, 1 minute, okay?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. And again, I just got to change my opinion. I would like the voters to vote on this rather than you guys just said it. But I think they hit the nail on the head. The fact that you guys have responsibility to do whatever you want with this money scares the living hell out of me, to be honest, right? Because I don't think you're fiscally responsible. You talk about major capital projects, that's like the $56 million Putnam scam, in my opinion, right? And on top of that, how about recs, parks and recs? I see that's another sales tool you've used. You had $100,000 on the chart. That's half a pocket park. I'm out.
Okay, thank you very much. So it sounds like you're changing your opinion too, that maybe it should go to the voters. So I am going to wrap up this conversation tonight, and we will pick it up again at our next meeting, and we will vote at our next meeting as to whether or not we put it on the ballot.
And how the ballot looks.
And how the ballot looks, and if we do decide to advance it, which I hope we will also discuss and set out a calendar of public events and some sort of meeting date so that it's very clear what kind of conversations there will be about this going forward. Okay?
Donald, will we have an opportunity to see and discuss, I'm not sure how that would work, how the ballot item would look before the meeting in 2 weeks? I don't want to see it for the very first time at the
Stuart,
meeting.
what's your proposal on this?
I can send out the two options tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I know it's complicated, but thank you for sticking with it. It's an interesting question for our community and one worth asking, I think. So the next item on our agenda is Shannon will bring you up again.
Your lucky night.
All right.
Oh, my goodness. Ghost of select boards past in the back corner there. Pan the camera over to Tom Jacobs, standing in the corner, looking like he's
Like he's eating the canary.
You're on TV, Tom. All right, so the next item that we're going to talk about is, this should be fairly perfunctory. It was a very dense agreement, I have to tell you. I tried reading all the way through it, and I did, but I didn't understand a lot of it, so I'm hoping that our legal representation has gone deep on it. But what have you got for us here, Shannon?
Well, basically, we're asking the select board to sign the grant agreement resolution for, it's with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. The town would be the grantee, and the sub-grantee would be the Putnam Block redevelopment. And these are for community development block grant funds. It's $1,250,000 that are coming through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then they come through the Community Development Block Grant Program through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So those are, all of the sub-grantees that we work with are projects that I manage, I do the administration for as the Community Development Director. So usually those Community Development Block Grant funds go towards affordable housing, also to economic development. In this case, a lot of what I will be working on as far as the administrator is working with the Putnam Block on some of the goals that that project has set around job creation, for example. And so this agreement with the state is actually, I mean, it is dense, but it's really kind of boilerplate language that goes into any of these community development block grant agreements. The other piece, besides you signing this resolution to go forward with the grant agreement, is that the other piece that we have to have in place before they can collect any requisitions from the state is we have to have our legal counsel for the town review all of these documents. So I've already sent these to Rob Wilmington, as well as all of the various attachments that are here at the end, the special conditions documents that are mentioned. So
So he has not reviewed them yet, or
he's in the process of doing that. So I sent everything to him last week as it came into me, and he's going through and giving it his legal counsel. And the timeline, they're looking at, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development meets twice a month, I believe, and so their meeting on the 24th of January is when we would like to have everything, given to them as far as our legal counsel, the grant agreements, the sub-grant agreement, et cetera. So that's the timeline that we'd like to work with, so they can move forward with their work.
Would you like a motion?
I would like a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept this grant agreement from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Should we make it contingent on legal approval?
Yep, contingent on on full legal approval. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jim.
Question?
Discussion? Go ahead, Bruce.
Shannon, what is the town's, I hate to do this to you, I was hoping Rob would be here. What's the town's liability if some of the conditions are not met? What are we... So, for example, there's a whole host of these federal conditions at the end of this. And what I was trying to figure out over the course of the last 3 or 4 days of reading through this was trying to figure out if we sign it, which I think we will, but I'm just, how deep into the noose are we putting our head?
So let's not put that to Shannon, because talk about it.
I was hoping Rob would be here, and I realize he's not, but
Dan, this is a very standard contract, but
So
go
yeah,
ahead.
we have done dozens and dozens.
I'm sure we have.
And they're nothing different in this particular agreement than all the others. But to answer your question, is before any money is released, all of the conditions have to be met for that money to be released. So, and in no case is the town of Bennington responsible for funds, for a decision of whether or not funds will be released. That's always left to the state of Vermont. So we don't have it. Our liability is we have to diligently administer. So, and if we fail to administer it accurately, then the funds don't go out. Right. And then so what would happen is the folks that are counting on these funds to do the projects are going to be after us to do our job and get the administration of the project done. But everything, for instance, Shannon just talked about the attorney certifying things. That doesn't really have anything to do with the agreement. It has to do with all of the conditions to the agreement that need to happen before the state will even consider issuing the first requisition. So that's what Rob will be looking for.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make it pretty clear to the public. It is a lot of money, and I want folks to understand that we're not really the recipients. We're the pass-through and the we are a conduit, and no, we're the grantee. We are not a sub-grantee. We are the grantee.
And they are the sub-grantee.
And the development group is, but we have to make sure that they are doing what those other conditions are prior to the release of any funds. If I was, that's what I read it as, but I'd like the public to know that.
It's double-checked and triple-checked.
It's double-checked, so any of those conditions have to be documented, and all of those documents have to be uploaded into the state grant system, reviewed by this committee. So, I mean, there are many checks along the way.
Sure.
If that helps answer your question.
So we have been through a number of these grants before. They are arduous, but any other questions for Shannon while she's here? Chad? Jim?
I don't have a question for Shannon, but I just, again, after the discussion we just had about property taxes, I just want to make it perfectly clear to everyone, this is not town money.
Yes,
This is money that's
federal
coming
money.
to us. This is not taxpayer money.
Through us,
It's
yeah.
just coming and we're passing it on.
Well,
That's all.
let's be at least clear. It is taxpayer money.
Well,
It just happens to be from the federal taxpayer,
Yes.
Right,
which most of
exactly.
us are.
Right.
It's,
But at least we're getting it back.
we're getting it
we're
back.
getting it back.
I don't have a problem with that, but it
like
is
that.
taxpayer money.
Like getting that federal tax money back.
Yes, absolutely. I don't have a problem with that.
We should be getting more of it.
So if there are no other comments, I think I'm going to call the vote. No other comments? All in favor of the grant agreement resolution form PM1 to, as Jeannie, however you,
I don't know.
however you made the motion.
Contingent
on full legal review by Rob Wilmington, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, no opposed. So we will move on to our next item, which is, thank you, Shannon. Where'd you go? There, thank you for that. DPW union contract, Stuart?
Yes, you have before you a summary of the various article changes that were made during our recent negotiations with the Public Works Union. It's AFSCME Local 490. The changes are shown in bold. It was, as you well know, ended up being a one-year contract. Basic cost increase in wages of 3.53%. Healthcare participation remained the same. And there are some other small changes that improve what an employee can designate for at retirement, or use whatever sick leave at retirement. We clarify the way vacation time and comp time can be taken by the employee so that it's a little more controlled. Small amount of pay increase, a 10-cent pay increase for the assistant chief operator at the wastewater treatment facility. An increase in the stipend for those folks who serve on a confined space entry team, which is a relatively complex process. It's confined space entry and rescue. And some other minor wording changes there. But the union ratified this on January 6th unanimously, and now I'm asking for the board to consider ratifying the same conditions.
And we know from our executive session meetings with you that this is a long, difficult, sometimes complicated conversation, but I think in the midst of all that, this board at least would like to take a moment to say that we are very grateful to our unionized town employees and good work that they do and everything they get done. It's phenomenal how much this town does get done. We are, of course, always mindful of costs to the taxpayer and recognize that that's a delicate negotiation. And Stuart, thank you very much for engaging in that spirit and working really hard to get to something that we all can live with. So I would look for a motion to advance this union contract. Is there anyone?
I would move that we approve the union contract as negotiated.
Thank you, Bruce. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Chad. Any conversation, any discussion? I know we've talked about this a lot over the time with Stuart, but any last thoughts? No? Okay. Well, then I'm going to call the vote. All in favor of the contract as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so unanimous approval of that. Again, thank you, Stuart, for your hard work, and
Once these amendments are made to the contract itself, there will be a copy brought to a meeting where you'll be asked to sign as a member of the Select Board.
Okay. Stuart, I am going to ask, as you move into your manager's report, that it may not be you giving it, it may be Jeannie giving it, but I am going to ask that we add an update on the emergency homeless shelter conversations with the state, which are underway, and you can either do that yourself or pass to Jeannie if you'd like when you get there. But we're now in the manager's report, so what have you got for us?
All right, the gentleman yields his time to Ms. Jenkins.
Lovely. All right. Well, I mean, the small bit that I want to report is just that we did follow up on the comments that were made at the December 16th meeting, and there is a meeting in the works for a large number of organizations that are concerned about making sure that everyone in Bennington is warm and safe on, cold winter evenings. So the meeting is in the works, and there are quite a few organizations that have a piece of that conversation, and we want to make sure that it's clear that we define what the issue is, who's involved, and what the representative organizations can contribute to making sure that we create something that's just not in the moment, but will serve us for years to come. So, I think it's with thanks that the issue was raised, and we do take it seriously and are acting on it.
And for the purposes of this board, Jeannie and I will both attend that meeting, and we'll report back on what comes out of it. So, back to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much. Only one action item, and I'm not looking for a decision tonight on the request, just to place it perhaps on a future agenda for formal action. Staff has noted that the pavilion rentals at Willow Park, the rental rates have not changed in more than a decade. And what I'm putting before you this evening is a recommendation from staff to increase the rental rates for the pavilion, and in larger cases, increase the deposit, because the pavilions are actually heavily used throughout the summer, and the town is, of course, responsible for cleanup, for preparation in some cases, and we believe this more fairly represents the amount of effort that we must put into maintaining these facilities. So I just wanted you to know that this is out there, and I ask that you consider putting it on a future agenda.
So it's probably not missed on anybody, but the reason he's doing this is because we set rates for recreational use in town, as we have belabored during the course of this winter. And so I think it would be perfectly appropriate to bring this up at our next meeting, and I would look for a motion to consider the proposal from town staff at the next meeting.
Will be allowed to make comments, or can I make a comment now?
You absolutely. I guess either way, you can make a comment now, you can make a motion now. Either way, you can make a comment tonight if you like.
Okay, when I was looking at it, I was wondering if a per hour formula could be instituted, perhaps. I mean, if someone's renting the pavilion for an hour, it seems like that should cost something, but if someone's renting it for the entire day, that doesn't seem like that's fair, that the rate should be the same. So it was just something that I thought of.
Well, Stuart, that may be a question for your staff. I guess the cleanup costs are probably the same whether it's an hour or 2 hour, but that may not be that may not be the case.
Number of people also.
Yeah, well, the number of people takes...
Oh, there is, that's right, that is there, sorry.
So number of people is taken into account, but I suppose you could make the case that if you string a picnic out over 8 hours, that you're likely to leave more garbage around than if you just have a 1 hour picnic, but...
Just something to consider.
Be a great example
take a look
for
at
an algebraic equation where you could have a set fee and a variable rate of change. So,
Are you a math teacher or
I
something?
think it would be a great example.
I'm just saying.
Stuart, there's going to be a quiz at the next meeting.
Yes. Remember, I have a degree in civil engineering, so I somewhat understand what he's talking about.
It might be worth at the next meeting, or maybe it's not worth it, but it might be worth having your staff come talk to us about this. You know, one of the things that we've struggled with is how do we have better parks and recreation facilities without having it cost us more, without having it cost taxpayers more. And so I think one of the things that we have to be in touch with in order to figure that out is what are the exact costs of offering these things, these facilities for rent or for use to people. So it may be some other way to do it through an email or something, but it might be nice to get a little bit more of a sense on that, and then just ask them if they think an hourly. The thing about the hourly is somebody has to monitor that, and there's a little bit of work that comes with that too. So, but see what they think about that, and then if this continues to be their proposal, then we could consider that at the next meeting.
I will do so.
So do you really need a vote to?
No, well,
next meeting?
I guess I don't need a motion to put it on the next agenda. If you've agreed to put it there, then I'll take your word for it.
Everybody feels okay about that? Okay, we're putting you on notice, general public. We're going to be talking about fees for recreational facilities at our next meeting. And we're probably going to take action on it then.
I have a couple of just notes that are not part of the manager's report. I handed out earlier tonight the revised budget based on our actions Saturday with the new impact on the tax rate. And unfortunately realized on my way home from work today that I had failed to include those small amounts that I suggested adding at the meeting. So we'll get you another revised copy before January 27th. It doesn't change the numbers dramatically, but I did not include the monies for partnership activities and the CAT TV payments in those numbers. So I apologize for that, but you will get a second revised amount. And also, this week I authorized an emergency purchase. As you know, we have had purchased a used bucket truck that we use for a whole host of things, including tree trimming. Sometimes we use it to hang some of our decorations, a whole host of events. Unfortunately, the motor died in the vehicle. We had paid under $10,000 for that vehicle when we bought it. If you drive down towards Rensselaer, there's the
white truck.
Yes, the white truck place.
Yes.
Who's the caught up sales?
RJ asked if we could try to purchase another. He was able to go down, and we found a truck that's actually a little more heavy duty than the previous one. It has a total cost of $13,950, but it comes with outriggers and things like that will make it much more safe when we're using it, especially up in the trees. And it has a higher reach than the previous model. We will see what we can get for the prior model. The bucket still works, but the engine is blown. And this will be paid for $8,950 out of the highway budget, and Buildings and Grounds is going to contribute $5,000 out of their budget to make this purchase. So it's an emergency purchase under our new revised purchasing policy, and I'm notifying you that we've made the commitment.
I like the idea of a shared vehicle as opposed to having to have them both buy their own bucket trucks. So thank you for that.
That works. Just quickly then, we will be back before you on the 27th of January with the priorities for our recreation, which you asked us to pull together. On the PFOA front, contracts 8 and 9 have been bid. The low bidder on both contracts is Casella Construction of Rutland, which is interesting because they were not here in the very first round 2 years ago, but have become fairly aggressive in trying to do some additional work down here. Not much news on the Morgan Spring delivery system or the opioid lawsuit at the present time. And at the wastewater treatment facility, the digester cover, the secondary digester cover is ready to be put in place. And I thought it was interesting to note that that's a 97,000-pound piece of equipment that is placed by crane. We used a crane operator that we have used before to take it off, and he refused to try to put it back on because it was so unstable.
Bent his crane?
It didn't bend his crane, but he was very concerned about the weight he was moving. So just let you know that the wastewater project is moving forward. We're still looking at a February 2020 completion for the whole project. So that's good news. And I think that's all I have.
Questions for the managers? Jeannie?
Yeah, I am unclear why we only negotiate the construction of a new delivery system for Morgan Springs when it's in season. Why wouldn't now be a good time to negotiate it when there's less stuff going on?
Well, frankly, I've been spending my time looking at the already permitted design and trying to decide whether or not we should push forward with that design.
Okay.
It would then require using town funds because of the individuals we were negotiating with want a larger, more heavily operated facility. And we've kind of gone easy on the negotiations once we entered this season because there's construction season that is coming up, but we weren't, I think there was an intent to try to start building in the fall. We didn't get there. As you all know, we have a number of differences of opinion as to how that should be operated and the number of hours of operation. So I'm currently looking at other options to build the facility that would require using some of our reserve monies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Upcoming agenda, so we on our, let's tick through this, Stuart, at our next meeting on the 27th. We are looking at recreation, the second installment of the options tax ballot item consideration. Workforce and development we put off.
You were going to have workforce development?
What's that?
Workforce development?
No, we're moving that maybe to the first meeting in March.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Have you,
But
did you speak to Shannon about that at all?
No.
Sorry,
It's a
Shannon.
good thing that it's.
Is this going to be a problem? How many people are, is this,
Well, you just have to tell me what you have in mind.
so this is something I just got this afternoon from Jeannie by email but it's not for lack of, it's just been difficult to be in touch with everybody. But you've been in touch with several people.
So
right?
we can talk. So it's really.
Initiatives that are happening.
Yeah, so.
Umbrella topics.
So it'd be an umbrella topic. And there may be there are 4 or 5 people. Yeah.
So we'll do that on that. What date did you say on that one, Jeannie?
Whatever the first.
Well, the first meeting in March is the floor meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so the first select board meeting in
First
March.
real select board meeting in March.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The second, 9th.
What's the date?
The 9th of March.
It would be, yes.
Should we check that?
If I'm right.
You're right. It is the 9th of March.
That sounds right.
Yeah, the election is the 3rd.
Election's the 3rd.
Floor meeting is the 2nd.
Yeah.
Okay, and you said Willow Park fees, right?
Willow Park fees. Anything else for next week, next meeting?
The roundabout, feasibility study for the roundabout at Bennington College is on the agenda as well. We'll have folks from the consultant hired by V-Trans to review those alternatives at the meeting.
Great.
And did you mention the TIF boundary?
No.
Oh, yeah, that's,
And the
thank
TIF.
you.
It should only take 10 minutes. It's very fine.
TIF boundary, that's a minor adjustment of a part of a building lot, right, okay.
It looked like that.
All right, so that's what we're looking at for the 27th,
Yeah.
and I think we'll hold off on any further planning as we find out what happens next week. So. All right, so other business. Members, anything from, I always start at year end. Why don't we sneak over and start with Chad and see if you've got anything?
Just one quick thing, if, kind of deals with agenda setting, if a business owner or someone wanted, or thought they had an item that was supposed to be on the, or should be on the agenda, should they contact you, Stuart, to try to get on the agenda?
They can contact me, they can contact Stuart, you know, either one is fine.
Okay.
So just to be clear, you know, what didn't work about the citizens' comment period at the end of December was that it came to us as sort of a surprise.
Yeah.
So there was no opportunity for the staff to have done homework on it or to have prepared a response for it. Same thing with the conversation about the Brooklyn Bridge or anything like that. You know, if you really want an answer, ask the town staff first, say, what's the answer to this question? If your goal is really to get an answer. If you're not happy with that answer or you're not satisfied, then there's the opportunity to come here during citizens' comment and say, look, I tried to get an answer, I'm not satisfied with it, I'm going to the select board. So,
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay, great, yeah. And that invitation goes out to the whole community. Jeannie?
Nothing?
Jim?
Nothing.
Bruce?
I have nothing.
Okay.
Just something.
Oh, excuse me, I do have one thing. I went to see Bill today, and he brings you greetings.
Great.
And he's looking forward to returning.
Great, yeah, and both Jeannie and I have had some positive emails with him recently, and
Yes,
you know, we
he
keep
told me.
him in our hearts and in our minds, and we are optimistic that Bill Scully's coming back. So that's our position, and we're sticking with it.
Right.
You hear that, Bill?
I hope so.
So we look forward to that day very much.
Donald, I have one thing I did forget, I'm sorry.
Anything else from you, Bruce?
No, that's it from me.
Chad.
Sorry. I just also wanted to thank the Bennington Banner and Bennington College for Bennington's Got Talent. If people watched on Facebook on Friday or were there Friday, it was a great competition, and Bennington definitely has talent. So great job to all the people that tried and did their best, and congratulations to the winner.
That's great. Okay, Jean.
Yeah, just something really quick. I just want to thank the Highway Department for putting up that really amazing stop sign on Week Street, the one that flashes, the new stop sign. Wow.
Looks like a toy.
I know. You can see it from so far away. It's very, very effective. It's the first time I've ever seen one of those, so anyway.
I wanted to say to Paul Doucette that we went up to look at it, and I watched somebody stop right there at that light, but then they tootled right on through the one at Washington.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
But that's okay, that's human nature. Yes, there are stop signs all along that street now. So everybody watch out on Weeks Street.
All right.
Yep.
So everybody, watch out on Week Street.
I do like the sign, though.
Yeah, all right.
It's really effective.
We have a need to go into executive session on a real estate matter. We probably could use a 3-minute break, but could I have a motion, please, to go into executive session?
So moved.
Yeah, we'll get, and what's your caveat you'd like to add?
That we will not be coming out with any actions, or will we? I mean, that's the question. So there's no action that's being asked us to take.
We will not be coming out of this meeting taking an action, no.
Okay, that's,
Okay.
I think people
So do I have a
need to know.
second on executive session?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, 3-minute break and then back at it, people.